Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I played cursed music I found on the deep web. The next morning, someone was singing in my basement. Alright, so I never really expected this to happen, and honestly, I'm not even sure if I should be writing about it. But here we are. I guess I just need to get it off my chest, and maybe warn some of you guys not to mess around with things you don't understand. I'm a regular dude, living a pretty mundane life. I've always been into weird stuff, like creepypastas and horror games. That's my thing. But this was something else entirely. It all started a couple of weeks ago. I was bored out of my mind, stuck in my apartment, and just scrolling through Reddit and YouTube. I stumbled upon this thread talking about the deep web, the usual darkest corners of the internet kind of stuff. Most of it is bullshit, but sometimes you find something that catches your interest. That's when I saw a comment about cursed music tracks that supposedly drive you insane or summon something terrible if you listen to them. Sounded like an urban legend, but it piqued my curiosity. I dove into this rabbit hole, reading everything I could find. I ended up on some shady forum that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. The design was basic HTML, and the background was a blinding neon green. The forum had a bunch of threads with titles like The Melody of Madness and Doomed Tunes. It was all pretty ridiculous until I clicked on one titled The Devil's Lullaby. The post was short, just a link and a warning. Listen at your own risk. Once you start, it never stops. I'm not superstitious, so I copied the link into a Tor browser, expecting a dead end or some weird prank. Instead, it took me to an MP3 file, just sitting there waiting to be downloaded. I hesitated for a second, feeling that weird sensation you get when you're doing something you know you shouldn't be. But curiosity got the better of me, and I downloaded the file. It was just called Lullaby P3. I plugged in my headphones, hit play, and waited. At first, it was nothing special, just a soft, slow melody. It was kind of soothing, actually. I started feeling a bit drowsy, like I could fall asleep right there in my chair. But then, things changed. The music became discordant, the notes clashing against each other like nails on a chalkboard. It was almost physically painful to listen to, but I couldn't stop. I was transfixed. Images flashed in my mind, horrible things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, faces twisted in agony, whispering voices that seemed to be speaking directly to me, saying things I couldn't quite understand. My heart was pounding, and my mouth was dry. I wanted to stop the music, to rip off my headphones and throw my laptop across the room, but I was frozen. After what felt like hours, the music stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I sat there trembling and drenched in sweat. I yanked off my headphones, my hands shaking, and just stared at my laptop screen. I couldn't process what had just happened. It was like I had been somewhere else, somewhere dark and twisted. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the music, the whispers growing louder. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the sound of someone singing. At first, I thought it was my TV, but it was off. I lay still, listening, my heart in my throat. The singing was faint, coming from somewhere beneath me. My basement. I live alone, and I never go down to the basement. It's just a dusty old place filled with junk and cobwebs. There was no reason for anyone to be down there. But the singing continued. A soft, haunting melody that made my skin crawl. It was the same melody from the cursed track, but somehow alive, as if someone or something was down there, singing it back to me. Panic set in. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that I'd find an old radio or something had turned itself on. I made my way to the basement door, my hand shaking as I turned the knob. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the air growing colder with each step. The singing grew louder, more distinct, echoing off the walls. It was a woman's voice, clear and haunting. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The basement was empty, just as I had left it, but the singing continued, coming from the far corner where the shadows were deepest. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The light flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching me, but then it was gone, and the singing stopped, leaving me in oppressive silence. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. There was no logical explanation for what I had just experienced. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. Back upstairs, I locked the basement door and shoved a chair against it for good measure. I sat in my living room, lights on, trying to calm down and rationalize what had just happened. Maybe I was dreaming, or maybe the lack of sleep was getting to me, but deep down, I knew it was the music. I had opened some door I couldn't close. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every little sound. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. I just sat there, staring at the basement door, waiting for something to happen. I knew I had to figure out what was going on, but I had no idea where to start. That's when I remembered the forum, the one where I'd found the music link. I had to go back, see if anyone else had experienced something similar, if anyone knew how to stop it. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to delve any deeper into whatever this was, but I didn't have a choice. I needed answers. The forum was still there, as cryptic as ever. I posted a message describing what had happened, hoping someone would reply. Hours passed with no response, and I started to feel even more isolated. It was like the music had cut me off from the rest of the world, trapping me in this nightmare. But then, just as I was about to give up, I got a notification. It was a private message from an anonymous user. The subject line read, "I can help." My heart leapt as I clicked on it, desperate for any glimmer of hope. The message was short and to the point. Don't listen to it again. Don't try to understand it. You've been marked. It wants you, and it won't stop until it gets you. Meet me at the old church on Elm Street tonight at midnight. Come alone. I sat back, a chill running down my spine. What had I gotten myself into? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to ignore the message, to forget about the music, and try to move on with my life. But another part of me, the part that had listened to the cursed track in the first place, needed to know more. I needed to understand what was happening and how to stop it before it was too late. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in my apartment grew more oppressive. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. The thought of going down to the basement again made my skin crawl, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me down there, something that wouldn't rest until it had me. I checked the time, 11:30 p.m. If I was going to meet this mysterious stranger, I needed to leave soon. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out into the night. The the cold air a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere of my apartment. The streets were deserted, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath my feet as I made my way to the old church. It was a dilapidated building, long abandoned and forgotten. The windows were boarded up, and the once grand entrance was covered in graffiti. I hesitated at the threshold, a sense of foreboding washing over me, but I'd come this far, and I needed answers. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The interior was dark, the air musty and cold. I could barely make out the outline of the pews and the altar at the far end. As I moved deeper into the church, the door creaked shut behind me, plunging me into silence. I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Hello?" There was no response, just the sound of my own breathing. I was about to turn back when I saw a figure step out from the shadows near the altar. My heart skipped a beat as the figure moved closer, their features obscured by the darkness. I clenched my fists, ready to defend myself if needed. The figure stopped a few feet away, and I could see it was a man, middle-aged, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes. He was dressed in tattered clothes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He spoke in a low, raspy voice. "You're the one who listened to the music." I nodded, unsure of what to say. He glanced around nervously before continuing. "I've been watching the forums, waiting for someone like you. You've made a grave mistake, but there's still a chance to fix it." He explained that the music was a curse, a melody that binds itself to the listener's soul. It was created by someone or something that thrived on fear and suffering, using the music as a gateway into our world. Those who listened were marked, haunted by the melody until they succumbed to its madness. The singing in my basement was just the beginning. I listened, horrified, as he told me about others who had fallen victim to the curse, people who had disappeared without a trace, leaving only the echoes of the song behind. He claimed that he had once been marked too, but had found a way to break free. He could help me, but it wouldn't be easy. I had to confront whatever was in my basement, face it head on, and reject the music's hold over me. Part of me wanted to laugh, to dismiss everything he said as the ravings of a madman, but deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. I could feel the music's presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for its chance to pull me under. I agreed to follow his instructions, to do whatever it took to rid myself of the curse. We spent the next few hours going over the plan, the man detailing every step with meticulous care. I had to go back to the basement, play the music one last time, and confront whatever emerged. It would be dangerous, but I couldn't live like this, with the specter of the melody haunting my every waking moment. As dawn approached, I left the church, my mind racing with fear and determination. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of facing that thing in my basement filled me with dread. I had a choice: fight for my sanity or let the music consume me. When I returned home, the apartment was silent. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted slightly, as if the music knew I was preparing to face it. I took a deep breath and headed to the basement, my heart pounding with each step. The chair was still wedged against the door, a flimsy barrier against the darkness below. I moved the chair aside and unlocked the door, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I descended the stairs, the singing began again, soft and inviting. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pressed on, flashlight in hand. The basement was just as I had left it, but the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I reached the far corner, the place where I'd seen the figure before. The singing grew louder, enveloping me in its haunting embrace. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the cursed track. My finger hovered over the play button, my mind screaming at me to stop. But I had to do this. I had to end it. I hit play, and the melody filled the air, mingling with the singing until they became one. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a form that seemed to rise from the depths of my worst nightmares. A figure stood before me, its features obscured by darkness, but its eyes, those eyes burned with an otherworldly light, piercing into my soul. I wanted to run, to flee, and never look back, but I stood my ground, remembering the man's words. I had to confront it, to reject the music's hold over me. The figure reached out, its hand hovering inches from my face. The air crackled with energy, and I felt the music pushing against my mind, urging me to give in. But I fought back, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. I focused on the melody, twisting it in my mind, altering its notes and disrupting its rhythm. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. I pushed harder, willing the music to break, to shatter into a million pieces and free me from its grasp. The basement seemed to tremble, the very walls vibrating with the force of the struggle. The figure let out a wail, a sound that cut through the music and sent a jolt of pain through my skull. I screamed, feeling the last of my energy slipping away, but I held on, refusing to let it win. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The music stopped, the figure vanished, and I was alone in the darkness once more. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled the air moments before. I sank to the floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion. I had done it. I had faced the music and survived. But as I sat there in the darkness, a nagging thought crept into my mind. The man had said I could break free, but he never mentioned what would happen next. Had I truly escaped, or was this just the beginning of something far worse? I shook the thought away, focusing on the relief that flooded my senses. The music was gone, and the singing had ceased. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted me for days had lifted, leaving only a sense of calm in its wake. I made my way back upstairs, leaving the basement behind. As I locked the door, a sense of closure washed over me. I had faced the darkness and won, but I knew I would never be the same. The experience had changed me, opening my eyes to a world I never knew existed. I collapsed onto my bed, sleep overtaking me almost instantly. For the first time in days, my dreams were free of music and shadows. I awoke the next morning, feeling more rested than I had in weeks. The sun streamed through the window, a welcome reminder that I had survived the night. I checked my phone, half expecting another message from the mysterious man, but there was nothing. It was as if he had vanished, leaving no trace of our encounter. I knew I should be grateful, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder if he had truly been real, or if he was just another part of the music's twisted game. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal routine, but the experience lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself avoiding the deep web, wary of stumbling upon something else that might pull me into its depths. The music was gone, but its presence had left a mark, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. I never heard the singing again, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I could swear I heard a faint melody drifting through the air, just beyond the edge of hearing. A reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. But I was alive, and for now, that was enough. I had faced the music and survived, and that was a victory I would carry with me, a testament to the strength that lay within, waiting to be discovered in the darkest of times. The aftermath of my encounter with the cursed music was supposed to be the end of my ordeal, a strange and terrifying chapter in my life that I could close and move on from. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that the echoes of that night lingered in ways I hadn't anticipated. At first, it was subtle. I'd be going about my daily routine when I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting just beyond my vision, a flicker of movement where there should have been none. My rational mind tried to brush it off as paranoia, the lingering effects of sleep deprivation and stress. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the dreams that truly unnerved me. Night after night, I'd find myself back in that basement, standing before the dark figure. Its eyes, those burning orbs of light, would bore into me as the discordant melody played all around, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, the phantom notes still ringing in my ears. It felt as though the music had imprinted itself onto my very soul, refusing to let go. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Whenever I was home, I felt a presence lurking just out of sight, as if the shadows themselves were alive and aware. I started leaving lights on in every room, hoping to banish whatever might be hiding in the darkness. But it was a futile effort. The unease remained, a constant companion that I couldn't escape. My friends noticed the change in me. I'd become withdrawn, jumping at the slightest sound. I tried to explain it away as stress from work, but they saw through my lies. One night, while we were hanging out at a bar, my buddy Mike finally cornered me. "Dude, what's going on with you?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "You've been acting weird ever since that night you bailed on us without any explanation." I hesitated, not wanting to drag him into the madness I'd stumbled into, but the need to confide in someone, to share the burden of my experience, was overwhelming. I leaned in, lowering my voice so no one else could hear. "It's going to sound crazy, but do you remember when I told you I was messing around with some deep web stuff?" Mike nodded, his expression growing serious. "Yeah, you said something about cursed music, or whatever." You never finished the story. I took a deep breath, recounting the events of that night in the basement, the music, and the figure I'd faced. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in his eyes, the rational part of him wanting to dismiss it as nonsense. But there was something else too, a flicker of unease, like a whisper of recognition. "That's messed up, man," he said when I finished, rubbing the back of his neck. "But you're sure it wasn't just, a nightmare or something?" "I wish it was," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But ever since that night, things haven't been the same. It's like something followed me back, and I don't know how to get rid of it." Mike was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke, his tone careful. "Look, my cousin is into some weird paranormal stuff. He's got a whole collection of books on curses and hauntings. Maybe he could help you figure this out." I hesitated, unsure if involving more people was a good idea. But what choice did I have? The nightmares were getting worse, and the feeling of being watched was becoming unbearable. I nodded, trying to muster a smile. "Yeah, maybe it's worth a shot." The next day, Mike and I drove out to his cousin's place, a small house on the outskirts of the town. The place was cluttered with odd trinkets and shelves filled with dusty tomes. His cousin Alex was an eccentric guy with wild hair and a penchant for conspiracy theories. He listened intently as I recounted my story, nodding along as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Sounds like you've got a spirit attachment," Alex said matter-of-factly, rummaging through a pile of books. "It's not uncommon with cursed objects or music. The spirit uses the music as a vessel to latch onto you." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "How do I get rid of it?" Alex handed me a worn book, the pages yellowed with age. "You need to break the connection. This book has rituals and protection spells. It's not foolproof, but it's a start. Whatever you do, don't listen to that music again. It'll only strengthen the bond." I thanked him, clutching the book like a lifeline. As we left, Alex called after me, "Be careful. Spirits can be unpredictable. If it feels threatened, it might lash out." Great, I thought. Just what I needed to hear. That night, I pored over the book, trying to make sense of the archaic language and bizarre instructions. It felt surreal, like I was living in a horror movie, but I was desperate, willing to try anything to rid myself of the lingering darkness. I followed the steps for a cleansing ritual, lighting candles and reciting incantations in a language I didn't understand. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't quite explain. As I finished the ritual, the shadows in the room seemed to recede, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, free from nightmares and phantom music. I woke up the next morning, feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, the ritual had worked, but my relief was short-lived. As I went about my day, I noticed subtle changes. Objects weren't where I left them. Doors creaked open on their own, and the air seemed colder, almost hostile. It was as if the spirit was fighting back, refusing to let go. One evening, as I sat on my couch trying to distract myself with mindless TV, the lights flickered and went out. My heart skipped a beat, the familiar sense of dread settling over me. I grabbed my flashlight, scanning the room for any sign of movement. The beam of light landed on the basement door, now slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it since the night I faced the figure. Yet there it was, inviting me back into the darkness. My gut twisted with fear, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But I couldn't leave, not yet. I had to end this, to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows once and for all. I made my way to the basement door, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The darkness beyond was impenetrable, a yawning abyss that seemed to swallow the light. I descended the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The air was cold, a damp chill that seeped into my bones. At the bottom, I paused, listening for any sound, any hint of the singing that had haunted me. But the only noise was the distant hum of the city beyond. Steeling myself, I stepped forward, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The basement was unchanged, but the atmosphere was different, charged with a sense of anticipation. I knew I wasn't alone. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a familiar form. The figure stood before me once more, its eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. But this time, there was no music, no discordant melody to drown out my thoughts. I raised the book, reciting the incantations with all the conviction I could muster. The figure flinched, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. I pressed on, the words flowing from my lips in a steady stream. I could feel the air crackling with energy, the very fabric of reality bending under the strain. The figure let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating through the air. It reached out, its hand brushing against my skin. I felt a jolt, like an electric shock, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I poured all my fear, my anger, my desperation into the words, willing the spirit to leave me, to release its grip and vanish back into the darkness. The figure writhed, its form distorting and shifting. The room seemed to pulse, the walls closing in around me. But then, with a final anguished wail, the figure shattered, dissolving into a cloud of shadow that dissipated into the air. I stood there, panting and trembling, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The darkness had lifted, the oppressive presence gone, but as I made my way back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow the music still lingered, waiting for its chance to return. Back in the safety of my living room, I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. I had confronted the darkness and emerged victorious, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that the music had left its mark. I knew I'd never be free of its influence, not entirely, but for now, the nightmares were over, and I could breathe easy, at least for a little while. As I drifted off to sleep, a faint melody echoed in my mind, the ghost of a song that refused to be forgotten. A reminder that some battles never truly end, that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. I awoke the next morning, feeling a strange sense of calm. The shadows in my apartment seemed less menacing. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. It was as if a weight had been removed, leaving me lighter and more at ease. In the days that followed, I gradually returned to my normal routine, the fear and anxiety slowly fading into the background. The experience had changed me, opened my eyes to a world I had never known existed, but it had also taught me the strength that lay within, the resilience to face whatever darkness might come my way. I never listened to the cursed music again, never returned to the forums where I'd first discovered it. I'd learned my lesson, and I wasn't eager to repeat the experience. But every now and then, in the quiet moments of the night, I could swear I heard a faint melody drifting through the air, just beyond the edge of hearing. A reminder that some things, once unleashed, can never truly be contained. But I was alive, and for now, that was enough. I'd faced the darkness and survived, a testament to the strength that lay within, waiting to be discovered in the darkest of times. Life slowly returned to normal, but there was always an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. The darkness that had consumed my life felt like a distant memory, but it left behind scars I couldn't ignore. Every so often, I would catch myself staring at the basement door, half expecting it to swing open on its own, revealing whatever nightmares lay in wait. Despite the uneasy calm, I began to rebuild my routine, piece by piece. I reconnected with friends, took on new projects at work, and tried to immerse myself in the mundane details of life. But as much as I tried to move on, the memory of the cursed music lingered in the corners of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, an email notification popped up on my laptop. I opened it, surprised to find it was from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk." Against my better judgment, I clicked on the message. The email was short, a cryptic warning that sent a chill down my spine. The music never truly leaves. It's part of you now. Be careful. They're watching. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it. But the message felt all too real, rekindling the unease that had just begun to fade. I tried to brush it off as a prank, some internet troll who'd stumbled upon my forum post and decided to mess with me. But as the days went by, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering secrets just out of reach or more. I began to notice strange occurrences around my apartment. Lights flickering, doors creaking open, objects moving on their own. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, the lingering effects of paranoia. But as the incidents grew more frequent, I couldn't deny the truth. Something was wrong. One evening, as I sat in my living room, trying to focus on a book, the TV flickered to life, static filling the screen. I stared at it, my heart racing. Slowly, the static morphed into an image, a dark, shadowy figure standing in my basement, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. I dropped the book, fear coursing through me. It was the same figure I'd confronted, the same presence I thought I'd banished. But how could it be here now, on my TV screen? The image flickered and faded, replaced by the familiar blue glow of the blank screen. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone, desperate to contact Mike or Alex, but the device slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. The shadows in the room seemed to close in, suffocating me with their presence. I backed away, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The voices were inside my head, their words twisting and turning like a swarm of insects. I stumbled to the window, throwing it open and gulping in the cold night air. The voices subsided slightly, but the sense of being watched remained. Zoe leaned against the windowsill, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to calm myself. That night, I slept with the lights on, the TV and laptop both unplugged, hoping to ward off whatever presence had invaded my home. But sleep was elusive, the whispers haunting my dreams and leaving me more exhausted than before. The next morning, I called Alex, my voice shaky as I recounted the events of the previous night. He listened intently, his tone serious as he offered advice as, "It sounds like the spirit is trying to re-establish its connection. You need to reinforce the barriers, protect yourself from its influence." He walked me through another ritual, more complex and intense than the first. I spent the day gathering the necessary materials, determined to rid myself of the spirit once and for all. That evening, I performed the ritual, following Alex's instructions to the letter. The atmosphere in the apartment seemed to shift, the shadows receding as the ritual reached its climax. I felt a sense of relief, a calmness that had been absent for weeks. But as I finished, a thought struck me. What if the spirit wasn't trying to come back? What if it had never left? The idea gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the newfound peace. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe, free from the oppressive weight of the shadows. I settled onto the couch, the exhaustion finally catching up to me, and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The following days were uneventful, the incidents subsiding to the point where they were almost forgotten. I allowed myself to relax, convinced that the worst was over. But as the week drew to a close, an unsettling sense of déjà vu crept in, as if I was standing on the precipice of something terrible. I awoke one night to a strange sensation, a tingling on the back of my neck that set my nerves on edge. The room was pitch black, the air thick with an electric charge. I reached for the lamp, but the switch clicked uselessly under my fingers. The power was out. My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The shadows seemed to dance and shift, just out of reach, taunting me with their presence. I sat up, clutching the flashlight like a talisman, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, a soft melody drifted through the air, the familiar notes of the cursed music weaving through the silence. I froze, my blood running cold as I realized the source. It was coming from the basement. I stood, my body trembling, as I made my way to the basement door. The music grew louder, more insistent, drawing me in despite my fear. I reached the top of the stairs, hesitating, as I peered into the darkness below. The music echoed off the walls, a siren song that pulled at my mind, urging me to descend. Against my better judgment, I took a step forward, then another, the flashlight beam bobbing as I moved. The air grew colder, the melody wrapping around me like a shroud. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the music stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. I shone the light around the basement, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows were thicker here, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then I saw it, the figure standing in the corner, its eyes glowing with that familiar, otherworldly light. It watched me, unmoving, as if daring me to come closer. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step forward, determined to end this once and for all. I opened my mouth to speak, to confront the figure, but the words caught in my throat. The air crackled with energy, the shadows closing in around me. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the weight of the darkness was pressing down, suffocating me. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming. The flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as I struggled to keep it steady. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The figure raised a hand, the motion slow and deliberate. I flinched, half expecting it to strike, but it simply pointed, its finger aimed at the far wall. Confused, I followed its gaze, the flashlight illuminating a section of the basement I'd never noticed before. There, hidden behind a stack of old boxes, was a door. It was small and unassuming, almost like a service hatch, its edges crusted with dust and grime. I stared at it, my mind racing with questions. Where did it lead? And why was the figure showing it to me? The figure remained still, its gaze unwavering. It was as if it was urging me to open the door, to uncover whatever lay beyond. A sense of foreboding washed over me, but curiosity won out. I stepped forward, pushing aside the boxes and grasping the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage that stretched into darkness. The air that wafted out was stale and cold, tinged with the scent of damp earth. I hesitated, glancing back at the figure, but it simply watched, its expression inscrutable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I stepped into the passage. The walls closed in around me, the space claustrophobic and oppressive. The flashlight beam wavered, casting long shadows that danced along the corridor. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the earth. My footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound in the stillness. As I walked, the whispers began again, soft and insistent, seeping into my mind like poison. I tried to block them out, focusing on the path ahead, but the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to speak in unison, their words unintelligible, yet filled with urgency. My heart raced, the sense of unease growing with each step. Finally, I reached the end of the passage, the walls opening into a small chamber. It was bare, the floor and walls made of rough stone, but in the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small ornate box. The whispers reached a crescendo, the voices urging me to open the box, to see what lay within. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. But something compelled me forward, a force beyond my control. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the box. The whispers fell silent, the air growing still and expectant. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid, revealing the contents inside. There, nestled within the box, was a small, ancient-looking phonograph record. The grooves were worn and scratched, the surface marred by age and neglect. But it was unmistakably the source of the cursed music, the melody that had haunted me for so long. I stared at the record, a mix of fear and fascination swirling within me. The figure's presence was gone, the chamber empty, save for me and the box. I was alone with the source of my torment, the object that had drawn me into this nightmare. I reached for the record, my hand hovering above it as I weighed my options. I could destroy it, rid myself of its influence once and for all, or I could play it, face the music, and whatever consequences might follow. The choice was mine, and mine alone. I knew the risks, the danger that lay in wait, but the whispers urged me on, their voices a siren song that pulled at my mind. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. As I lifted the record from its resting place, the air seemed to shift, the shadows closing in around me. I knew I was standing at a crossroads, the outcome uncertain, but I had to know the truth, to understand the power that had consumed my life. And so, with the record in hand, I turned and made my way back through the passage, the darkness pressing in as I retraced my steps. The whispers faded, the voices falling silent as I emerged into the basement. The figure was gone, the basement empty once more. I stood there, clutching the record, the weight of my decision settling over me. I knew what I had to do, the path I had chosen. I returned to the living room, setting the record on the table. The shadows seemed to retreat, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. I could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was to come. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve as I prepared to face the music. The whispers might have fallen silent, but the echoes remained, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. But I was ready to confront the truth, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden in the shadows. The music might be part of me now, but I refused to let it control my life. With a sense of determination, I set up my old record player, placing the phonograph carefully on the turntable. The needle hovered above the grooves, poised to play the melody that had haunted me for so long. I paused, taking one last moment to collect myself before letting the needle drop. The record spun, the familiar hiss and crackle of static filling the air as the music began to play. The melody rose, its haunting notes weaving through the silence, pulling at my mind. But this time, I was ready. I focused on the music, letting its rhythm wash over me as I prepared to face whatever lay beyond. The whispers returned, a chorus of voices that surrounded me, their words just out of reach. But I didn't flinch, didn't falter. I stood my ground, determined to see this through to the end. As the music reached its crescendo, the shadows seemed to pulse, the air charged with an electric energy. I felt a presence, a weight that pressed down on me, testing my resolve. But I was unyielding, refusing to be cowed by the darkness. I focused on the melody, altering its notes and disrupting its rhythm, just as I had before. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at my mind. I gritted my teeth, pouring all my strength into the music, willing it to break, to shatter the bonds that held me captive. The air crackled with energy, the shadows writhing and twisting as the melody reached its peak. And then, with a final, anguished wail, the music stopped. The air grew still, the whispers falling silent as the shadows receded. I stood there panting and exhausted, but victorious. The darkness had been vanquished, the music's hold broken. But as I stood in the silence, the record player spinning idly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the music had left its mark in ways I couldn't yet understand. I knew I'd never be free of its influence, not entirely. The echoes would linger, a reminder of the darkness I'd faced and the strength I'd found within. But for now, the battle was over, and I was free to reclaim my life. As I turned off the record player, a sense of calm washed over me. The whispers might have fallen silent, but their echoes remained, a testament to the resilience that lay within, waiting to be discovered in the darkest of times. With the music silenced and the shadows receded, I thought I had finally escaped the grip of the cursed melody. The air in my apartment felt lighter, the oppressive tension that had loomed over me dissipating into nothingness. I began to settle back into the familiar rhythm of daily life, slowly rebuilding a sense of normalcy. Yet, beneath the surface, a new kind of unease began to take root. It started with small, innocuous things, misplaced objects, a strange sense of déjà vu, the feeling that time itself was subtly out of sync. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, the lingering after effects of everything I'd been through. But as the days passed, these little oddities became harder to ignore. One morning, I woke to find every clock in my apartment had stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. It was unnerving, a reminder that something still wasn't quite right. I replaced the batteries, reset the time, but the thought nagged at me. Was it a coincidence, or a sign that the curse wasn't truly gone? A few nights later, I awoke suddenly, a strange feeling in my chest, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. The room was pitch black, the only sound the rhythmic thump of my heartbeat. I lay there paralyzed, unable to shake the sense that something was watching me. The darkness felt alive, filled with a presence I couldn't quite pinpoint. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place, but all I found were shadows dancing along the walls. I closed my eyes, willing the sensation to pass, but it lingered, like a specter haunting the edges of my consciousness. The next day, I decided to reach out to Mike. I needed to talk to someone, to share what I was going through. I called him, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the inexplicable sense of dread that had settled over me. "Man, I thought it was over," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "I thought I had gotten rid of it, but now it feels like it's still there, lurking in the shadows." Mike listened, his tone serious. "Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you. After everything you went through, it makes sense to be on edge." "I hope you're right," I replied, though a part of me knew there was more to it. "But I can't shake the feeling that something's still here, waiting." Mike suggested meeting up later that week, and I agreed, hoping some time with friends would help ease the tension. But as I hung up, the unease lingered, a silent echo of the chaos I'd faced. As the day wore on, I tried to distract myself with work and mundane tasks, anything to keep my mind occupied. But the feeling of being watched never fully left, a constant presence just beyond my awareness. That evening, as I settled in for the night, I caught sight of a figure standing in the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. I froze, my heart skipping a beat, but when I blinked, it was gone. I shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The shadows were returning, slipping back into my life despite my efforts to keep them at bay. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, the lingering effects of stress and fatigue. But as the days turned into weeks, the incidents became more frequent, more insistent. One night, I woke to the sound of soft humming, a melody that tugged at the edges of my memory. I sat up, listening intently, but the sound faded, leaving only silence in its wake. I got out of bed, cautiously making my way through the apartment, searching for the source. The air was cold, the shadows deep and unyielding. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. The sense of being watched was stronger than ever, an oppressive weight that pressed down on me from all sides. I reached for the light switch, flicking it on with trembling fingers. The room flooded with light, banishing the shadows, but the feeling of dread remained. It was as if the darkness had seeped into the very walls, a silent echo of the music that had once consumed my life. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, the lights blazing in every room as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. The melody had been brief, a fleeting whisper in the silence, but its presence lingered, a haunting reminder of what I'd faced. Desperate for answers, I decided to reach out to Alex again. I needed to understand what was happening, why the curse seemed to persist despite my efforts to banish it. I called him the next morning, explaining the strange occurrences and my growing sense of unease. "It sounds like the curse isn't completely broken," Alex said, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes these things have a way of lingering, like a shadow that refuses to fade." "What can I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I can't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder." "There might be another way," Alex replied, his tone serious. "A ritual to cleanse your home, to drive out any lingering spirits or energy. But it's not without risks. You need to be absolutely certain you want to go through with it." I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Part of me was terrified of what might happen, of what I might unleash. But another part of me was determined to put an end to this once and for all. I couldn't keep living in fear, trapped by shadows and whispers. "Let's do it," I said finally, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. Alex sent me the details of the ritual, a complex series of steps involving candles, herbs, and incantations. It was meant to cleanse my home, to rid it of any lingering spirits or malevolent forces. I spent the next day gathering the materials, a sense of purpose driving me forward. That night, as the clock ticked towards midnight, I prepared for the ritual. The apartment was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. I lit the candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows along the walls. The herbs burned in a small dish, their smoke curling into the air, filling the room with a pungent aroma. I began the incantations, my voice steady despite the fear that churned within me. The air seemed to shift, the shadows retreating as the ritual progressed. I could feel a presence, a weight pressing down on me, testing my resolve. The whispers returned, a cacophony of voices that filled the silence. But I pushed on, refusing to be cowed by their presence. I poured all my fear, my anger, my determination into the words, willing the spirits to leave, to release their grip on my life. As I neared the end of the ritual, the air crackled with energy, the shadows swirling around me in a final, desperate attempt to maintain their hold. But I didn't waver, my focus unwavering as I completed the final incantation. The room seemed to tremble, the very walls vibrating with the force of the ritual, and then, with a final, ear-splitting wail, the shadow shattered, dissolving into nothingness. The air grew still, the oppressive weight lifting as the last of the darkness was banished. I stood there, panting and trembling, the silence deafening in its intensity. The whispers had fallen silent, the shadows receded, the curse was broken, the spirits driven out at last. But as I extinguished the candles, a sense of unease lingered. I had won, but at what cost? The shadows might have been banished, but their echoes remained, a reminder of the darkness that had consumed my life. I made my way to the window, staring out into the night. The stars were bright, the moon casting a soft glow over the city. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly free, liberated from the chains that had bound me. But as I stood there, a soft melody drifted through the air, the faintest whisper of a song that tugged at the edges of my memory. I knew it was a reminder, a testament to the strength I had found within, but also a warning. The music might be gone, but its echoes would linger, a part of me now. And as I turned away from the window, I knew that I'd carry the memory of the cursed melody with me always, a silent echo of the darkness I had faced and conquered. Even after the cleansing ritual, life didn't immediately return to normal. The fear had lifted, but the uncertainty remained, like a shadow at the edge of my mind. I went through the motions of daily life, trying to convince myself that the nightmare was over, but in quiet moments, I could still hear the faint whisper of the cursed melody, a reminder of the darkness I'd faced. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out the attic when I stumbled upon a dusty old box. It was filled with forgotten memorabilia, old journals, photographs, and trinkets from my childhood. I was flipping through the faded pages of a journal when something fell out and fluttered to the floor. It was a photograph, yellowed with age, showing a group of children standing outside a dilapidated house. I stared at the photo, a strange feeling washing over me. The house in the picture seemed oddly familiar, with its boarded-up windows and crumbling facade. But it was the children that caught my attention. Their faces were blurred and indistinct, as if time itself had erased their features. I turned the photo over, searching for clues, and found a date scrawled in faded ink. August 1923. Beneath the date were the words, Elm Street Orphanage. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the significance. The orphanage had been closed for decades, its dark history shrouded in mystery and rumors of hauntings. I couldn't shake the feeling that the photo was somehow connected to the cursed music, to everything I'd been through. Driven by a need for answers, I decided to visit the old orphanage, hoping to uncover the truth behind the photograph and its connection to the melody that had haunted me. The orphanage was on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by overgrown woods and hidden from view. As I approached, the atmosphere grew tense, the air heavy with an unsettling energy. The building was, as I remembered it from the photo, its windows dark and empty, the walls covered in ivy. I hesitated at the threshold, a sense of foreboding washing over me, but I pushed forward, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with decaying wallpaper and dusty floors. The silence was oppressive, the only sound the soft crunch of debris beneath my feet. I made my way through the building, exploring room after room, but finding nothing but dust and shadows. It was as if the building had been abandoned overnight, left to decay in solitude. As I wandered, a strange feeling began to settle over me, a sensation of being watched. I paused, listening intently, but the only sound was the distant rustle of leaves outside. I shook my head, telling myself it was just nerves, the lingering effects of paranoia. But then I heard it, a faint, haunting melody echoing through the halls, the notes drifting on the air like a ghostly lullaby. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the tune, the same cursed melody that had haunted me for weeks. I followed the sound, drawn to it despite my fear. The music grew louder as I approached the end of the hallway, leading me to a small locked door. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The music was almost deafening now, a relentless chorus that filled the air. With a deep breath, I turned the handle, the door swinging open to reveal a small, dark room. Inside was a single phonograph, its needle spinning idly on a record, the source of the music that had plagued me for so long. I stepped inside, the music wrapping around me like a shroud. The room was filled with old furniture and dusty shelves, but my attention was drawn to a series of photographs pinned to the wall. They showed the same group of children from the photo I'd found, their faces obscured by shadows. In the corner of the room stood a figure, its outline barely visible in the darkness. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized it was the same figure I'd seen before, the one that had haunted my dreams and nightmares. The figure turned towards me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I froze, fear and defiance warring within me. I had faced this darkness before and survived, but the presence before me was a reminder of the power it held. The whispers returned, a chorus of voices that seemed to speak in unison, but this time they weren't a cacophony of confusion. Instead, they formed a single coherent message. Free us. I stared at the figure, the realization dawning on me. The music wasn't just a curse. It was a prison, trapping the souls of the children who had once lived in the orphanage. The whispers, the shadows, the haunting presence, all of it was a plea for release. Determined to set them free, I approached the phonograph, my resolve firm. I reached for the needle, my hand steady despite the fear that coursed through me. The figure watched, its expression inscrutable, as I lifted the needle from the record. The music stopped abruptly, the silence that followed deafening in its intensity. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but the room remained still, the shadows receding into nothingness. The figure stepped forward, its form shimmering. In the dim light, I met its gaze, feeling a sense of calm wash over me as the whispers faded into silence. The figure nodded, a silent acknowledgement of my actions, before dissolving into the air, leaving me alone in the room. I stood there, the weight of the moment settling over me, before making my way back through the orphanage. The air felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I had done it. I had broken the curse, set the souls free from their torment. As I stepped out into the sunlight, a sense of peace washed over me. The darkness that had haunted me was gone. The echoes of the cursed music finally silenced. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But as I walked away from the orphanage, I knew I'd carry the memory of the cursed melody with me always, a reminder of the darkness I'd faced and the strength I had found within. The music might be gone, but its echoes would linger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. For now, though, I was free to live my life without the specter of the curse hanging over me, free to embrace the light and leave the shadows behind. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a testament to the strength that lay within, waiting to be discovered in the darkest of times. I ordered black box with flower of the deep web. The next day, I woke up into a garden. It all started when I was scrolling through the dark corners of the web, looking for something to break the monotony of my dull life. I know it's not the safest place to be, but sometimes I crave a little excitement. My life is a cycle of work, home, sleep, and repeat. The only way I found to spice things up was by exploring those forbidden parts of the internet that people always warn you about. That's where I stumbled upon an ad for something called the black box. The listing was bizarre and vague. It had just a single image, a plain black box with an intricate white flower etched onto its surface. No description, no details, just a price tag, $250. It was oddly enticing, like it was calling out to me. I know I shouldn't have, but my curiosity got the better of me. Without thinking too much about it, I clicked buy. There was a certain thrill in the uncertainty. What could it be? Was it a prank, a scam, or something more sinister? After I placed the order, a sense of dread washed over me. Maybe it was the realization of what I had just done, or the eerie silence in my apartment. But I started feeling anxious. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that it was just a silly box from the deep web, and I'd probably never even receive it. The next day, there was a knock on my door. My heart jumped into my throat as I opened it to find a package sitting on the floor. It was smaller than I expected, wrapped in plain brown paper. The only marking was a black flower stamped on the top. My hands were trembling as I picked it up and brought it inside. I set it down on the kitchen table, staring at it like it was a bomb about to go off. I sat there for a while, debating whether to open it or not. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was in some kind of weird nightmare. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to tear open the paper. Inside was the black box, just as it was in the picture. It looked like it was made of some kind of polished wood, with the white flower carved delicately into the surface. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves of the design. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside was a small piece of paper and something wrapped in a black cloth. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. The message was short and cryptic. What you seek lies within. My heart pounded harder in my chest. I hesitated, wondering if I should just stop there and toss the whole thing in the trash. But my curiosity was too strong. I unwrapped the black cloth to find a small vial of some kind of powder. It shimmered in the light, almost like it was glowing. That night, I couldn't get the box out of my mind. The powder was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was beautiful, yet ominous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for something significant. I didn't sleep much, tossing and turning, as my imagination ran wild with possibilities. Then things started getting strange. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, covered in sweat. I could hear a faint whispering, like a soft breeze blowing through leaves. But it was more than that. It felt like something was calling out to me, beckoning me to come closer. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. My room was dark, shadows creeping up the walls, and I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. The whispers grew louder, almost like they were inside my head. I stumbled out of bed, trying to shake off the disorientation. My feet carried me to the kitchen, where the black box still sat on the table. The whispers intensified as I approached it. a chaotic symphony of unintelligible voices. My hand moved on its own, reaching out for the vial. I was drawn to it, like it held some kind of power over me. Before I knew it, I had unscrewed the cap and poured a small amount of the powder into my hand. It shimmered with an unnatural light, captivating my gaze. I felt compelled to consume it, a primal urge that overrode all reason. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to stop, but it was too late. I brought the powder to my lips and swallowed it. As soon as I did, everything went black. I fell to the floor, my body convulsing as I slipped into unconsciousness. My dreams were filled with vivid, nightmarish visions of a vast garden, overgrown with twisted, writhing plants. They moved as if alive, reaching out to me with tendrils that pulsed with an eerie glow. The whispers were everywhere, surrounding me, growing louder and more insistent. When I woke up, I found myself lying in the garden from my dreams. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, but there was something rotten beneath it, a sickly sweet decay that turned my stomach. The garden stretched out in all directions, the plants shifting and swaying like they had a mind of their own. Panic surged through me as I tried to make sense of what had happened. I was trapped, and there was no way out. It was then that I realized the true nature of the black box and the powder it contained. I had opened a door to another world, a realm where nightmares came to life, and now I was part of it. The garden was alive, and it wanted me. The whispers returned, echoing in my mind, telling me there was no escape. I was part of this twisted reality now, bound to the garden forever. When I first opened my eyes, I thought I was dreaming. The colors were too vivid, too bright for reality. But the longer I lay there, the more I realized this wasn't a dream. The garden surrounded me, pulsing with life. The plants were taller than me, their leaves rustling like they were talking to each other in a language I couldn't understand. The sky above was a strange shade of purple, casting an unnatural glow over everything. I pushed myself up, my body aching like I'd run a marathon. The ground was soft beneath me, covered in a carpet of moss and flowers. They looked beautiful, but something about them felt off. Their petals were the wrong color, some a sickly yellow, others a deep blood red. I took a step forward, trying to make sense of this impossible place. Every move was met with resistance, like the air was thicker here, pressing down on me with an invisible force. I stumbled forward, trying to find some sign of civilization, or at least a path to follow. But everywhere I looked, the garden stretched on endlessly, a labyrinth of twisting vines and towering trees. I felt like I was in a maze with no exit, and the whispers were back, slithering into my mind, reminding me that I was alone. My head throbbed with pain, and my mouth was dry, as if I hadn't drunk water in days. I stumbled upon a small pool of water, shimmering under the strange light. I hesitated, knowing that in a place like this, nothing was what it seemed, but thirst overpowered my caution. I knelt down and cupped my hands, bringing the water to my lips. It was cool and refreshing, but it left a metallic taste in my mouth that made me gag. As I drank, I saw my reflection in the water. My face was pale, my eyes wide with fear, but there was something else. Something moved behind me, a shadow flitting across the surface of the pool. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the garden, watching me silently. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was no response, just the whispering that never stopped. It felt like the garden was alive, aware of my presence. I was intruding in its domain, and it didn't want me there. I wandered through the maze of plants, each step taking me deeper into the heart of this alien world. Time lost all meaning. I could have been there for hours, or maybe days. The sky never changed, and the oppressive heat bore down on me relentlessly. Eventually, I came across a clearing. In the center was a small stone altar covered in strange symbols. They seemed to writhe and change as I looked at them, forming words that I couldn't quite understand. But one symbol stood out, a black flower, identical to the one on the box. My heart pounded as I approached the altar, compelled by a force I couldn't resist. I reached out and touched the flower symbol. As soon as my fingers made contact, pain shot through my hand like I'd been burned. I yanked it back, staring at the angry red mark that now marred my skin. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping in my mind. They were chanting, repeating a phrase over and over, but I couldn't make sense of it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. Vines shot up from the earth, wrapping around my legs and pulling me down. I screamed, struggling against them, but it was no use. They were too strong, their grip tightening with every second. I was trapped, unable to move as they dragged me toward the altar. Panic surged through me as I realized I was being offered up to the garden. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and I could feel something watching me, something ancient and powerful. It was as if the garden itself was alive, a sentient entity that had brought me here for a reason. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen, but instead of pain, there was a sudden silence. The vines released me, retreating back into the earth as quickly as they'd appeared. I was free, but the calm was unsettling. It felt like the eye of a storm, a brief moment of peace before everything fell apart. I stood there trembling, unsure of what to do. The altar seemed to pulse with energy, and the whispers returned, softer now, like a lullaby meant to soothe me. I reached out again, drawn to the flower symbol, despite the pain it had caused. This time, when my fingers brushed against it, the world around me shifted. The garden dissolved, replaced by darkness. I was floating, weightless, in a void that stretched on forever. The whispers faded away, leaving me alone in silence. For a moment, I felt at peace, free from the terror of the garden. But then slowly, the darkness began to take shape. Shadows coalesced around me, forming figures that seemed both familiar and alien. They were people, but not quite. Their faces were blurred, their features twisted and distorted like they had been painted by a mad artist. They circled around me, moving closer, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. I wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows reached out, their fingers brushing against my skin, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones. "Join us," they whispered, their voices echoing in my mind. "Become part of the garden." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I was frozen in place, trapped by their gaze. The darkness closed in, swallowing me whole, and I realized the truth. I was no longer in the world I knew. I had become part of the garden, bound to its will. There was no escape, no way back to the life I'd once known. The shadows enveloped me, pulling me into their embrace, and I knew that I was lost. I had become one with the garden, a prisoner of its twisted reality, forever bound to the darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my apartment, sprawled out on the cold kitchen floor. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, some twisted nightmare that my mind had conjured up. But as I pushed myself up, my hand brushed against the black box, and a shiver ran down my spine. It was still there, open and empty, the flower on its surface gleaming under the dim light. The reality of what had happened hit me like a truck. I hadn't escaped. The garden had let me go. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled to my feet, looking around my familiar surroundings. Everything seemed normal, but it felt wrong. The whispers were gone, but their echo lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that I was never truly alone. I rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face in a desperate attempt to shake off the lingering sense of dread. As I looked up into the mirror, my reflection seemed different. My eyes were sunken, my skin pale and drawn. It was as if the garden had taken something from me, a piece of my soul that I could never get back. I needed to get rid of the box. I grabbed it and headed out to the dumpster behind my building, determined to put as much distance between myself and that cursed object as possible. I threw it in, slamming the lid shut with a sense of finality. But as I turned to leave, I heard something, a faint rustling, like the sound of leaves in the wind. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned back slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. The dumpster was silent, but the noise hadn't been my imagination. I backed away, refusing to acknowledge the fear creeping up my spine. It was just a box, just a piece of wood with a stupid flower on it. It couldn't hurt me. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I tried to return to my normal life, pretending that nothing had happened, but the world felt different, like a distorted reflection of reality. I'd see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving when they shouldn't, plants twitching like they were alive. Every time I blinked, I was back in the garden, surrounded by its oppressive presence. At night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They were no longer confined to my dreams. They seeped into my waking life, a constant murmur that drove me to the brink of madness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My life unraveled, and I could feel the garden tightening its grip on me. One evening, as I sat on my couch, trying to drown out the whispers with the noise of the television, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Do you understand now?" My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I typed back a shaky response. "What do you want from me?" The reply came almost immediately. "You are chosen." The whispers rose to a fever pitch, drowning out all other sound. I dropped the phone, clutching my head in agony. The garden was calling to me, its pull irresistible. I stumbled to the window, looking out at the city beyond. But all I could see was the garden, its twisted beauty consuming everything. I knew then that there was no escape. The box, the powder, the garden, they were all part of something larger, something beyond my comprehension. I had become part of its dark tapestry, woven into its endless cycle. Desperation clawed at me. I had to find a way to break free, to sever the ties that bound me to this nightmare. I remembered the altar, the black flower etched into its surface. It was a symbol of power, a key to the garden's secrets. If I could find it again, maybe I could reverse what had been done. I searched online, scouring forums and message boards for any mention of the box or the garden. Most people dismissed it as a hoax, a prank designed to scare the gullible. But buried deep in the comments, I found something, a reference to an ancient ritual, a way to commune with the garden and reclaim what had been taken. It was dangerous, the kind of thing that you'd expect to see in a horror movie. but I was out of options. I gathered the materials I needed, preparing myself for whatever lay ahead. The instructions were vague, a collection of cryptic symbols and half-remembered chants, but I had nothing left to lose. That night, I set up the ritual in my living room. Candles flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. I drew the symbols on the floor, their meaning lost to time, but imbued with a power I could feel in my bones. As I began the chant, the whispers returned, rising and falling in time with the words. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that crackled through the room. My heart pounded in my chest, fear and determination warring within me. This was my last chance, my only hope of breaking free. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward the symbols as if drawn by an invisible force. The room grew colder, the shadows deepening as the ritual reached its climax. I could feel the garden's presence, its attention focused on me. It was a living entity, vast and unknowable, and I was at its mercy. But as I completed the final verse of the chant, something shifted. The whispers faltered, their hold on me weakening. The shadows recoiled, retreating back into the corners of the room. I had done it. I had broken the garden's grip, severed the ties that bound me to its twisted realm. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. The whispers were gone, replaced by a blessed silence. I had won, defied the garden's will, and reclaimed my life. But as I stood there, breathing heavily in the aftermath of the ritual, a sense of unease settled over me. The garden was still out there, its power undiminished, and I knew that it would never truly let me go. I had glimpsed into its depths, seen its true nature, and it had marked me. The garden was patient, eternal, and it would wait. I had escaped its grasp for now, but the whispers would return, and when they did, I would be ready. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy after the ritual. For weeks, the whispers stayed silent, and I was free from the suffocating presence of the garden. I tried to move on, to piece together the fragments of my shattered existence, but the memory of that otherworldly place lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. I found solace in routine, throwing myself into work and reconnecting with friends. I even started dating again, trying to forget the nightmare I had lived through. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of the garden, its twisted beauty haunting my dreams. I knew it was only a matter of time before it returned. One evening, I was out with a friend at a bar, trying to distract myself with drinks and laughter. The place was packed, filled with the comforting noise of people talking and music playing. I was beginning to feel like myself again, the weight of the past lifting ever so slightly. Then as I was sitting at the bar, a man approached me. He was tall and thin, with an unsettling presence that set my nerves on edge. His eyes were dark and piercing, as if he could see right through me. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just a cold familiarity that chilled me to the bone. "You look like someone who's seen the other side," he said, his voice smooth and uncomfortably intimate. I felt a jolt of fear, my heart racing. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, trying to sound indifferent. But he wasn't fooled. He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my ear. "The garden never forgets," he whispered. "You're part of it now, whether you like it or not." I pulled away, my skin crawling. "Leave me alone," I snapped, my voice more desperate than I intended. He just laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed in my mind long after he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I left the bar shortly after, shaken and unnerved, The encounter had stirred something within me, a gnawing anxiety that refused to be silenced. The whispers had stopped, but the garden's influence remained, an invisible tether that bound me to its will. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. I found myself back in the garden, its vibrant colors and intoxicating scent more real than ever. The plants reached out to me, their tendrils wrapping around my limbs with a gentle insistence. The whispers surrounded me, a chorus of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. But there was something different this time. The shadows that had once threatened to consume me were now watching, waiting. I could feel their eyes on me, their presence a tangible force that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, but I could sense the garden's presence, lurking just beyond the edge of my consciousness. It was as if the barrier between our worlds had thinned, allowing its influence to seep through into my reality. Desperate for answers, I reached out to the online community that had helped me before. I posted about my experiences, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening to me. The responses were varied, some dismissing my story as fiction, others offering theories and advice. One message stood out. It was from someone who claimed to have experienced something similar. They warned me that the garden was a living entity, a parasite that fed on those who dared to trespass into its domain. It was relentless, patient, and it would never stop trying to reclaim what it had lost. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The garden hadn't let me go. It had simply loosened its grip, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I was caught in its web, a pawn in a game I couldn't hope to understand. The days passed in a blur, each one bleeding into the next. The garden's presence grew stronger, its whispers creeping into my thoughts even when I was awake. I tried to resist, to fight back, but it was like battling a force of nature. No matter what I did, the garden always found a way back in. I began to see it everywhere, in the way the trees bent in the wind, in the flowers that bloomed outside my window. It was as if the world around me was slowly transforming into the garden, its reality merging with my own. The line between the two blurred, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I knew I had to act before it was too late. The ritual had bought me time, but it wasn't enough. The garden was patient, waiting for me to slip up, to let my guard down. I needed to find a way to sever the connection, once and for all, to reclaim my life from its grasp. With renewed determination, I returned to the dark web, searching for any information I could find about the box, the powder, and the garden itself. It was a long shot, but I was desperate for anything that might help me break free. Finally, after days of searching, I found a thread buried deep in an obscure forum. It spoke of a counter-ritual, a way to close the door between our world and the gardens. It was dangerous, more so than anything I had attempted before, but it was my only hope. I gathered the materials, my heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The instructions were clear, but I knew that any mistake could spell disaster. I had to get it right, to close the door before the garden could reclaim me. As I prepared for the ritual, the whispers grew louder, a constant drone that threatened to drown out my thoughts, but I refused to give in. I was stronger than the garden, stronger than its hold on me, and I would not be defeated. That night, I stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by the symbols I had painstakingly drawn. The candles flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I began to chant, the air grew thick with tension, the energy in the room crackling like static electricity. The garden's presence loomed large, its tendrils reaching out to me, desperate to pull me back into its embrace. But I held firm, focusing on the words that would seal the door once and for all. The candles flared, their flames stretching toward the symbols as if drawn by an invisible force. I felt the garden's anger, its fury at my defiance, but I pressed on, my voice rising above the din of the whispers. With the final words of the chant, a blinding light filled the room, erasing the shadows and banishing the whispers. The garden's hold on me shattered, and I felt the tether snap, freeing me from its grasp. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence was complete. The air was still, the oppressive presence of the garden gone. I had done it. I had severed the connection, broken free from its hold. But as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the ritual, I knew that the garden would never truly be gone. It was still out there, waiting in the shadows, patient and eternal. I had escaped its grasp, but it would never stop trying to reclaim what it had lost. And so I remained vigilant, always watching, always listening. The whispers have faded, but their memory lingers, a constant reminder of the world that lies just beyond our own. The garden is out there, and it will always be watching. Months have passed since I severed the garden's hold on me. The whispers have faded into a distant memory, and I've reclaimed my life, but the shadows of the garden still linger in my mind. It's a quiet dread, a persistent awareness that my escape was only temporary. The garden is patient, and I know it waits for the moment I let my guard down. I've learned to live with this constant vigilance, to watch for signs that the garden might be trying to return. I moved to a new apartment, far away from the memories of that cursed box. I've changed my habits, avoided anything that might draw me back into its grasp. But the garden is clever, and it finds ways to remind me of its existence. Every now and then, I catch glimpses of its influence in the world around me. A flower blooms where it shouldn't, its petals an unnatural shade of black. Shadows flicker at the corner of my vision, lingering just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. I've grown accustomed to these signs, though they never fail to unsettle me. I've learned not to ignore these warnings. Each one is a reminder that the garden is still out there, its tendrils stretching across the fabric of reality. I can never truly be free of it, but I can prepare for the day it returns. I've spent countless hours researching, gathering knowledge about the garden and its mysteries. I've connected with others who have had similar experiences, shared stories of our encounters with this malevolent entity. Together, we've pieced together a fragmented understanding of the garden, its history, and its purpose. The garden is ancient, older than our world, a sentient realm that exists beyond the boundaries of human understanding. It feeds on those who wander into its domain, using them to sustain its existence. The whispers are its lure, a siren song that draws people into its depths. Once you've entered, you're never truly free. We formed a network, a community of survivors who watch for signs of the garden's influence. We share information, warn each other of potential dangers, and work together to protect ourselves from its grasp. It's not much, but it's a comfort to know that I'm not alone in this fight. The garden may be eternal, but so is our determination to resist it. We are vigilant, always watching for its return, ready to fight back if it tries to reclaim us. It's a lonely existence, but it's the price we pay for our freedom. As I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of unease, a nagging suspicion that the garden is closer than ever. I can't shake the feeling that it's watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I refuse to give in to fear. I've fought too hard to be free, and I won't let it take me back. The night is quiet, the city asleep around me. I stare out the window, watching the world bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. The garden is out there, somewhere beyond the darkness, waiting, but so am I. I turn away from the window, closing the blinds and retreating to the safety of my room. I've learned to live with the garden's shadow, to exist in its presence without succumbing to its pull. It's a constant battle, but one I'm determined to win. The garden may be eternal, but so is my resolve. I am vigilant, ready to fight for my freedom, to stand against the darkness that seeks to consume me. The whispers are silent for now, but I know they will return, and when they do, I will be ready. The garden waits, and so do I. But this time, I'm not afraid. My friends blackmailed me through the deep web. The next day, they went missing. Okay, I never thought I'd be the one typing out a story like this, but here we are. I have been a lurker on Reddit for years, just reading other people's experiences and thinking, wow, that sounds insane. But now, I've got my own messed up story to tell, and I'm not even sure where to start. It's hard to believe any of this actually happened, but I swear every word is true. So, to kick things off, let me give you some background. I grew up in a pretty average suburb, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing exciting ever really happens. My group of friends, let's call them Tom and Jake, for the sake of anonymity, were like brothers to me. We did everything together. Gaming marathons, camping trips, you name it. We were those inseparable, ride-or-die kind of friends. Now, we were all into the internet, but not in the normal way. We liked exploring the dark corners of the web. You know, the places you hear about in horror stories. It started off as harmless curiosity, a little thrill-seeking to spice up our mundane lives. We'd spend nights on the deep web, just poking around, checking out forums, occasionally buying weird stuff with Bitcoin. It was all fun and games until it wasn't. One Friday night, we were hanging out in Jake's basement. It was our usual spot, filled with old pizza boxes and energy drink cans stacked like trophies. Tom had found a new deep website that promised to be the most disturbing thing you'd ever see. The website was called The Other Side, which should have been our first red flag, but we were too intrigued to care. We clicked around for a while, browsing through creepy forums and live streams that made our skin crawl. It was disturbing, sure, but we'd seen enough that it didn't faze us much. Then we stumbled upon a private chat room that required a password. Being the hackers we thought we were, we started trying random codes and phrases until, by some miracle or curse, we got in. The chat was filled with messages that made my stomach turn. People were sharing videos, real videos, of things that no sane person would ever want to see. There was talk of black market trades, kidnappings, and even more horrific stuff that I won't get into. We should have backed out right then, but curiosity and stupidity got the better of us. We ended up downloading a file called Confession MP4, because why not? We thought it was some kind of prank video, something staged to scare people off. It wasn't. The video was a shaky handheld recording of someone in a dimly lit room. At first, it was just heavy breathing and the sound of something dripping, like water or blood, I couldn't tell. Then the camera focused and we saw a person tied to a chair, blindfolded and clearly terrified. A distorted voice started asking them questions, demanding confessions for things they didn't seem to understand. It went on for what felt like an eternity, each question more sadistic than the last. I could feel the tension in the room growing, Jake shifting uncomfortably in his chair, Tom's face going pale as he stared at the screen. We were frozen, our eyes glued to the horror unfolding before us. Finally, the video ended with a scream that still echoes in my nightmares. We were shaken, but we didn't talk about it. We just shut the laptop and tried to pretend it never happened. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd seen something we were never meant to see. We parted ways, each of us trying to act normal, but I could tell the others were as freaked out as I was. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. I woke up to a flurry of messages from an unknown number. The texts were threatening, saying they knew who we were, what we'd seen, and that we needed to keep our mouths shut if we valued our lives. I was scared out of my mind. My first thought was to call Jake and Tom, but when I tried, there was no answer. I checked online to see if they'd left any messages, but they hadn't logged on since we left Jake's place. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe they were just busy or their phones died, but something in my gut told me otherwise. Later that day, I got an email. The subject line was just my name in all caps. The message inside was even worse. A picture of my house, taken from across the street. Attached was another picture, one of Tom and Jake, looking scared and beaten, tied up in a room I didn't recognize. I felt the blood drain from my face as panic set in. This couldn't be real, right? It had to be some sick joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I was being watched, and my friends were in danger. I was stuck in a nightmare, and I had no idea how to wake up. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. I kept expecting someone to break down my door, but no one came. Instead, I received another email, this time with a video attachment. My hands shook as I clicked play, my heart pounding in my chest. It was another video of Tom and Jake, still tied up. They looked worse than before, covered in bruises and dirt. A figure stepped into view, wearing a mask like something out of a horror movie. They held up a sign that said, "Confess or they disappear." My mind raced as I tried to figure out what they wanted. Confess to what? We hadn't done anything wrong, at least not anything to deserve this. I felt trapped, helpless, and terrified beyond belief. I had to do something, but I had no idea where to start. My friends' lives were on the line, and time was running out. I spent the next few hours trying to convince myself that it was all some elaborate prank. Maybe Tom and Jake were just messing with me, getting back at me for some joke I pulled on them in the past. But as much as I tried to deny it, the fear gnawing at my insides told me otherwise. This was real, and my friends were in serious trouble. I paced around my room, running my fingers through my hair, trying to think of what to do next. Calling the police seemed like the obvious choice, but what was I going to tell them? That we'd been messing around on the deep web and found something we shouldn't have? That my friends were missing and possibly in danger because we watched a creepy video? I could already hear the skepticism in their voices, see the disbelief on their faces, but I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I pulled out my laptop and tried to retrace our steps. looking for anything that might help. The deep web can be a maze of horrors, but I had to go back, had to try and find a clue about where they might be held. I found the chat room again, the one we'd stumbled into the night before. The messages were still there, but the chat was active with new users discussing the same morbid topics. My heart pounded as I saw a new message pop up, addressed directly to me. Looking for something, I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Whoever this was, they knew I was watching. I had to be careful. I typed out a response, trying to sound calm and collected. "Who are you, and what do you want with my friends?" The reply came almost instantly. "You already know what we want. Confession." Confession? For what? I felt a wave of frustration mixed with terror. I typed furiously, "I don't know what you want me to confess. Just let them go." Another message came through, this time with a file attached. "Maybe this will help you remember." I hesitated, then clicked on the file. It was another video, but this time it was of me. Footage of me in my room, scrolling through the deep web, chatting with Tom and Jake. But then the video shifted to a scene I didn't recognize. A man, someone I didn't know, being followed by a shadowy figure. The camera zoomed in, and I saw my own face on the screen, watching from the shadows. I gasped, backing away from the screen. This was impossible. I'd never seen that man before, never followed anyone. This was some kind of setup, but it was expertly done, convincing enough to make me doubt myself for a split second. The messages continued, taunting me. "You see, we know who you are. We know what you've done." I slammed the laptop shut, feeling the walls closing in on me. They wanted to frame me for something terrible. And if I didn't play along, Tom and Jake would pay the price. I tried calling Jake and Tom again, hoping against hope that one of them would pick up, but their phones were still off. My mind raced through every possible scenario, each more horrifying than the last. The only thing I could think to do was go to their houses, see if maybe they'd turned up there. I threw on a jacket and rushed out the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I sped through the empty streets. First, I went to Jake's house. I knocked on the door, rang the bell, but there was no answer. His parents weren't home either, probably out of town like they often were on weekends. Next, I headed to Tom's place. His mom answered, looking worried as she opened the door. "Have you seen Tom?" I blurted out, trying to mask the panic in my voice. She shook her head, her eyes filled with concern. "I thought he was with you and Jake. He hasn't come home since yesterday." I nodded, forcing a smile and mumbling something about a mix-up, then hurried back to my car. The reality of the situation hit me like a sledgehammer. They were gone, and it was my fault. As I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the road ahead, I knew I couldn't involve anyone else. Whoever these people were, they had eyes everywhere. Going to the police or telling anyone else would only make things worse. I drove around aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but every shadow seemed to be watching me, every stranger a potential threat. I felt like I was being hunted, and the anxiety was suffocating. Eventually, I parked in an empty lot, resting my head on the steering wheel, trying to think. That's when I got another text, this time from an anonymous number. "TikTok. Time's running out." I screamed in frustration, slamming my fists against the steering wheel. They were playing with me, enjoying every second of this sick game. And the worst part, I was helpless to stop it. I needed to figure out who was behind this, how they'd managed to orchestrate everything so perfectly. I pulled out my laptop again, connecting to a public Wi-Fi network, and started digging deeper into the dark web forums, looking for anything that might point me in the right direction. Hours passed, the sky turning from blue to black as I scoured every corner of the web. Finally, I found a thread discussing the other side, the site we'd visited. People were talking about it like some urban legend, a place where the darkest of deals went down, where lives were bought and sold. One comment caught my eye. "If you get in, you're already dead." Chilling words, but there was a response from someone who claimed to have escaped. They talked about a group that ran the site, an organization that thrived on fear and manipulation, using the deep web to find their victims. I sent a message to this person, hoping they'd reply, but deep down, I knew it was a long shot. The clock was ticking, and I was running out of time. I had to find a way to save my friends before it was too late. But with each passing minute, my hope dwindled. The nightmare was only just beginning, and I was trapped with no way out. I sat there, the glow from my laptop illuminating the dark interior of my car. My mind was a mess of fear and frustration, trying to untangle the web of lies and threats I found myself trapped in. With each second that ticked by, my heart sank deeper, knowing Tom and Jake were out there somewhere, and I was no closer to finding them. Then finally, a notification. The person I'd messaged, the one who claimed to have escaped, had replied. I opened it with shaky hands, eyes scanning the screen desperately. Their response was blunt and cryptic, but it was the first glimmer of hope I'd seen in hours. "Meet me. Midnight. Old factory on 7th. Come alone. Trust no one. A location at least. Something to go on. A chance to get answers." I checked the time. It was already past 11. I didn't have much time. The old factory wasn't too far, but I knew the area. It was a rundown place, abandoned for years, making it the perfect spot for sketchy dealings. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me not to go, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to find out what they knew, had to try something. I drove with the windows down, the cool night air doing nothing to calm my nerves. The streets were eerily quiet, deserted, except for the occasional car passing by. As I turned onto 7th Avenue, the factory loomed ahead, its silhouette a dark shadow against the sky. I parked a block away, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and made my way toward the entrance. The factory was surrounded by a chain-link fence, parts of it rusted and broken, easy enough to slip through. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept forward, every sense on high alert. Inside, the place was a maze of empty rooms and rusted machinery, the air thick with dust and decay. I heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing off the walls, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't alone. "Over here," a voice whispered from the shadows, and I turned to see a figure standing in a doorway, barely visible in the dim light. I approached cautiously, trying to keep my fear in check. As I got closer, I could make out more details. A middle-aged man, unkempt and wary, his eyes darting around like a hunted animal. "You're the one who messaged me?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He nodded, glancing behind him, as if expecting someone to follow. "We don't have much time. They're watching." "Who are you?" I demanded. "And what the hell is going on?" The man took a deep breath, looking me in the eye. "I was like you once, curious, stupid, thought I could handle the dark web. But the other side, it's not just a website. It's a network, a syndicate. They find people like us, get us involved, and once they have you, there's no escape." His words sent a chill down my spine, But I had to know more. What do they want with me? With my friends? They want control, he said, his voice filled with urgency. They use fear to manipulate, to get people to do their bidding. And once you're in, you're trapped. They'll use your darkest secrets against you, make you do things you never thought you could. I shook my head, trying to process what he was saying. But I don't have any secrets. They want me to confess to something I didn't do. The man looked at me sadly, as if he had heard that before. They make you believe you've done things, twist your reality. It doesn't matter if you did it or not. They'll make everyone else think you did. I felt a pit in my stomach. It was worse than I imagined. How do I stop them? How do I get my friends back? He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder again. There's a way, but it's dangerous. You have to destroy their evidence, the files they have on you. Without proof, they lose their leverage. How do I do that? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. They keep everything in a secure server, he explained. I managed to get in once, but it's heavily protected. You'll need help, someone who knows their way around a computer. I thought of Tom, wishing he was here. He was always the tech guy, the one who knew how to hack into anything. But now it was up to me. Where's the server? Off-site, in a location I don't know, he admitted. But I can give you access to a contact, someone on the inside. They might be able to guide you. I nodded, knowing it was my only shot. Okay, give me the contact. I'll do whatever it takes. He handed me a slip of paper with a string of numbers and letters, an encrypted code. Use this to reach them, but be careful. They'll be watching your every move. Before I could thank him, he turned and slipped back into the shadows, leaving me alone in the darkness. I knew he was taking a risk by even talking to me, and I couldn't afford to waste any time. I headed back to my car, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I formulated a plan. I had to reach this contact, get the information I needed, and save Tom and Jake before it was too late. But as I drove away from the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes following my every move. The game was far from over, and I was still just a pawn. But now I had a move to make, and I was determined to win. We drove in tense silence, the adrenaline from our escape still coursing through our veins. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and I kept checking the rear view mirror, half expecting to see headlights barreling down on us. But the road behind remained empty, and slowly the realization that we were safe began to sink in. Tom and Jake were silent, their faces drawn and pale, their eyes darting around the car. I knew they were as shaken as I was, and we were all grappling with the reality of what had happened. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice hoarse. "How did you manage to find us?" I glanced at him, relief and gratitude flooding through me. "I had some help," I said. "There was someone who knew about the other side, helped me get into their files and delete our info." Tom let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe they actually caught us," he muttered. One minute we were heading home, and the next... His voice trailed off, the memory too raw and painful to relive. I nodded, understanding his hesitation. "I know. I'm sorry I got you into this mess." Jake shook his head. "We were all in it together, man. We were curious, and we went too far. But we got out. That's what matters." We drove in silence for a while, the city lights flickering past, as I tried to think of what to do next. We couldn't just go home. Not yet. Not while the threat of the other side still loomed over us. I pulled into a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. the neon sign buzzing quietly in the early morning darkness. The place was nearly empty, a perfect spot to regroup and figure out our next steps. We slid into a booth at the back, the waitress barely glancing at us as she refilled our water glasses. The normalcy of the place was jarring, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just escaped. "So, what now?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. I sighed, rubbing my eyes. "We need to lay low for a while. They won't forget this easily, and we can't just pretend like nothing happened." Tom nodded in agreement. "I think we should go somewhere far from here, at least for a few weeks. Let things cool down. Maybe figure out a long-term plan." "We should probably ditch our phones too," Jake suggested, glancing around as if expecting someone to be listening in. "They could be tracking us." I nodded, knowing he was right. We'd been careless before, too confident in our anonymity. But now, we couldn't take any chances. We finished our drinks, the gravity of our situation sinking in. We were essentially on the run, trying to stay one step ahead of an organization that had eyes everywhere. The thought was terrifying, but it was the only way to stay alive. We left the diner, the sky beginning to lighten as dawn approached. I felt the weight of exhaustion settling in, but there was no time to rest. We needed to disappear, to find a safe place where the other side couldn't reach us. As we drove, I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the uncertainty, the danger, but I also thought about the courage it took to fight back, to refuse to be a victim. We'd made it this far, and we'd keep fighting until we were truly free. I looked over at Tom and Jake, their faces set with determination. We were in this together, and no matter what came next, we'd face it as a team. We headed out of town, leaving behind the familiar streets and faces, the memories of our former lives. It was a new beginning, a chance to start over. But as the miles stretched out before us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that the other side was always just one step behind. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough. We'd find a way to stay safe, to live without fear. And as the sun rose on the horizon, I felt a glimmer of hope, a promise of freedom that was almost within reach. We just had to keep running, keep fighting, until we were finally out of the shadows. We kept driving until the roads turned from smooth asphalt to dusty trails, the city slowly receding into the background. The countryside was a welcome change, the open fields and sparse forests offering a sense of freedom we hadn't felt in days. Our only plan was to keep moving, keep putting distance between us and the chaos we'd narrowly escaped. The initial adrenaline rush was wearing off, replaced by a gnawing fatigue that threatened to overwhelm me. Tom was asleep in the back seat, his breathing deep and even, while Jake kept watch from the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The silence between us was comfortable, a shared understanding that words couldn't capture. As we entered a small town nestled between two hills, I pulled over to a gas station to refuel and grab some supplies. The clerk barely glanced at us as we entered, her attention focused on the small TV behind the counter. The normalcy of the scene was oddly comforting, a reminder of the world outside our immediate troubles. I filled up the tank while Jake picked out some snacks and drinks. As I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, a prickling at the back of my neck that refused to go away. I glanced around, but the few other cars in the lot were occupied by people absorbed in their own business, unaware of the storm we were hiding from. Back on the road, we drove until we found a small motel on the outskirts of the town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where people came to disappear for a while. We checked in, using cash, to keep our trail as cold as possible, and settled into the cramped room. Tom flopped onto one of the beds, groaning in relief. "I'm never going to take a real bed for granted again," he muttered, closing his eyes. Jake chuckled, tossing him a bag of chips. "You can say that again." I leaned against the door, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up with me. We were safe for the moment, but I couldn't help wondering how long it would last. "Do you think they'll find us here?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me since we left. Jake shrugged, popping open a can of soda. "Maybe, but we've got a head start, and they don't know we've ditched our phones. That gives us some time." Tom sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What if we keep moving? Stay off the radar, change locations every few days, until we figure out our next move?" I nodded, knowing he was right. We couldn't stay in one place too long, not with the other side still out there. But we also couldn't keep running forever. We needed a long-term plan, something that would let us rebuild our lives without constant fear. We spent the next few days lying low, changing motels, and staying under the radar. We talked about what to do next, tossing around ideas and strategies. Maybe we could find new identities, start fresh somewhere far away. Or maybe we could fight back, find a way to expose the other side, and end their reign of terror once and for all. But each plan seemed more impossible than the last, and with every passing day, the tension grew. The paranoia never left, a constant reminder of the danger lurking in the shadows. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, we gathered outside the motel, enjoying the cool breeze. It was the calmest I'd felt in days, a brief respite from the storm. "What if we go to the media?" Jake suggested, breaking the silence. "Expose them for what they are. People would have to listen if we had proof." Tom shook his head, looking doubtful. "Even if we did, they'd just deny it, cover it up, and they'd come after us harder than ever." "But if enough people knew," Jake started, but I cut him off. "They'd still find a way to bury it. They're too powerful, too connected." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We need to find a way to stay off their radar for good. Maybe there's someone who can help us disappear completely." We fell silent again, the weight of our predicament pressing down on us. The future was uncertain, a vast unknown that stretched out before us. But we had each other. That was more than some people had, and it gave me hope. A few days later, as we prepared to leave yet another motel, I received an encrypted message from the contact who had helped us. I opened it, my heart racing. "Change of plans," it read. "Meet at the coordinates below. You'll be safe there." I showed the message to Tom and Jake, their eyes widening as they read it. "Do you trust them?" Tom asked, his voice cautious. I hesitated, then nodded. "They helped us before. It's our best shot." We packed our things and hit the road once more, following the coordinates to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was isolated, far from any towns or prying eyes, the perfect place to hide. As we pulled up to the cabin, a figure emerged from the trees. It was the contact, the person who had guided us through the chaos. They smiled, waving us over. "You made it," they said, their voice warm and welcoming. "This place is secure. You'll be safe here." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a sense of safety I hadn't felt in weeks. We'd found a sanctuary, a place where we could finally breathe. Over the next few days, We settled into our new home, adjusting to the solitude and quiet. It was strange at first, but slowly we began to relax, to let go of the fear that had haunted us for so long. We spent our days planning for the future, dreaming of new beginnings and fresh starts. It wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to make it work. Together, we'd find a way to live without fear, to reclaim our lives from the shadows of the other side. And as the days turned into weeks, I felt a sense of hope growing within me. We were survivors, and no matter what happened next, we'd face it together. In this quiet corner of the world, we'd found something precious, freedom, and we weren't going to let it slip away.